And then are you going to post it on YouTube?
Yeah, we have a channel on the YouTube, and I will post the evening there, and I would share a link with
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Paul?
Okay, so first of all, welcome everybody. I'm really glad everybody's here. We're going to be exploring a question that a lot of people are asking right now. What's uniquely human in the age of AI? So before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of a feel of how the format's going to go. For the first part of this, I'm going to be asking you questions. Because we're trying to get through a lot of material, I'm going to ask that you respond in chat. And so if you want to make comments for the first part, respond in chat. I'll try to get done in about 45 to 50 minutes and then open it up so that everybody can ask real-time conversations. I'll also be sending out notes because I'm going to be referring to some authors as I go through this. Part of what I do in my weekly seminars is I talk about 3 authors and then I give you some practices, etc. This is going to be very similar. So I'll give you notes that will be sent out through Elena after this. But really
Which reminds me, if you would like to receive notes, Eventbrite doesn't have capability anymore to send attachment. So just
oh,
please type your email in the meeting notes. So I would have it as a record and I email it to everyone who wants it.
perfect.
Is it possible to write it in the chat box? Yeah?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay.
So what's uniquely human in the age of AI? Well, let me quick start with a story. I've been around AI for a couple of years now, working in large financial bank areas. And I was working with a leadership team, and they had a beautifully built dashboard. It had all the bells and whistles, predictive analytics, trend lines, risk indicators, all the things. The data was clear. Something in their pipeline was slowing down their delivery. Cycle times were creeping up. We've seen all this stuff before. Escalations were increasing. So the system had done its job and it showed the pattern, but the room was still quiet in terms of how to solve the problem. And so finally somebody said, what do we think's actually going on here? And that's when the conversation really started. One leader said the teams were overloaded. Another one said, no, this is a decision latency issue. We're not making enough decisions. Somebody else said, I think people just stopped raising risks earlier because the last time somebody did it didn't go very well. So everybody at that point paused and a real conversation started to emerge that would not have shown up with your best AI analytics. The dashboard showed the signal, but that's the symptom. The meaning only emerged once the humans really started talking. And at that moment, I got reminded of something really important, which is kind of what got me to this conversation. AI is amazing. It can help us see patterns faster than ever before. However, understanding what those patterns actually mean for people, for trust, for responsibility, and for the work itself, that part's still deeply human. And that brings us to the question that we're exploring today. What is uniquely human in the age of AI? AI can write faster than we can. It can analyze data at a staggering scale that we never could. It can summarize information, generate drafts. It can surface patterns that might take a team of analysts weeks to uncover. And that in and of itself is really impressive. The real question is not what can AI do, but what remains uniquely human. And so I asked that question because the future of leadership isn't competing with machines, although we're hearing a lot of AIs coming to take my job. The future of leadership is understanding where human judgment, human connection, and human responsibility still matters the most. So, as I said before, I'm going to start asking you guys a lot of questions. Before we go any further, we've got 8 people in the room. What's one way you're currently using AI, either in your work or in your life? And just put your answers into chat, please. And if you're not familiar, the chat button's straight at the bottom of your Zoom screen, just to the left. Operational analytics. Absolutely, Karsten. Absolutely. Job search. Oh, customizing resumes. Application tracking systems are looking for keywords, so it's a great way to use AI. Researching and being a sounding board for new programs. Absolutely, Kathy. Rephrasing something. Yeah, it's good for a sanity check on things. So you may have noticed something interesting happening with AI. As the technology is getting smarter, getting faster every day, the humans are now getting more and more important because the queries really matter. So the questions that we're asking really matter, which raises a deeper question. If AI can produce answers quickly, what becomes the real leadership skill? So one of the first authors I'm going to talk about today is Daniel Kahneman. And again, these authors will be in the notes and the books will be in the notes as well. So Daniel Kahneman is a great thinker. He spent decades talking and thinking and working on how humans think and how they make decisions. He wrote a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And in that book, he shows us that we are remarkable pattern detectors. We're constantly making sense of the world around us. But he also looked at our thinking and realized our thinking isn't purely rational. We're influenced by so many things: bias, emotion, experience, the context that we're standing in, sometimes just what we call gut feeling. And AI can process enormous amounts of information and identify so many patterns very quickly. But what it cannot fully do is understand the human context those patterns live inside. AI absolutely changes the speed of the information, but it doesn't remove the need for human interpretation. And in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, he really gets into how our thought process goes well beyond just understanding if this is true, this might also be true, and takes things into context in a way that AI really can't. So a question for you is, when you see an AI generated answer, do you tend to trust it immediately, or do you find yourself questioning it? Absolutely, Rob. We question it. Yep. Seeing a lot more questions. I'm seeing, yep, I haven't seen anybody who says, I just go with it blindly yet. And you're not really going to meet people like that. Most of us are challenged. Oh, I like that. Lonnie challenges it. Most of us are somewhere between curious, impressed, and a little bit cautious. But we're not just going to accept it blindly, which gets us to the first uniquely human capacity, which is meaning. That remains uniquely human in the age of AI. AI is very good at processing information. It can sort, summarize, and surface patterns faster than any of us can. But deciding what it actually means, that part's still human. Imagine you're looking at a dashboard like I talked about at the beginning, and those engagement scores have dropped. The system's doing its job. It's showing you the signal. It's showing you something's changing, but what it cannot tell you is what that experience actually feels like for people inside the system. Are they changing because they're tired? Are we slowing down because they're frustrated? Are they confused about priorities? Are they quietly disengaging because they don't feel culturally as a part of the system? Did we just go through a merger or a reorg? You only start to see that when people start talking and acting. Even then, a lot of what you learn doesn't come from the words alone. It comes from the pause right before someone answers. It comes from that furtive glance across the table when someone's getting ready to speak, or when someone goes, yeah, things are fine. That tone. These are nonverbal context clues. And these nonverbal context clues are uniquely human, and they're only subject to human interpretation. My next author, Oscar Trimboli, wrote a great book called How to Listen, which surprisingly is about active listening. But in that book, we're reminded that listening isn't just about hearing the words someone says. It's about understanding the context. It's about understanding the emotion, the state that that person was in. Often these are the things that people aren't quite saying, but they're in the messaging. And that's where the meaning lives. Not in the spreadsheet, not in the well-written prompt, not in the great response that sometimes comes with hallucinations, but in the conversation that follows. And that's where leadership, again, shows up. So, a question for you: think about the last time you saw data that looked concerning after you understood what it was really saying. What helped you actually understand what was going on? So, the last time you saw data and you're like, well, that's just data, but wait a minute, that shouldn't be like that. And then what helped you to put that into context, either culturally, meaning, the experience that people were going through? How did you make the meaning out of that data? And just put that answer into chat. Because that's the real humanity piece. So that's this first one, which is meaning. Assumption and abstraction. That's a really succinct way of putting it, Karsten. We're being able to take the data and interpolate and extrapolate at the same time beyond what's actually happening. That is meaning making. That's exactly what we're talking about. That remains deeply human no matter what technology. When things are different than expected, yeah, we're definitely going to look at that. So the second capacity I want to talk about that is uniquely human is judgment. Meaning and judgment follow hand in hand. AI, again, really great at generating options. You can ask it for 5 strategies, 10 approaches, the pros and cons of each, and it'll give you a thoughtful answer in seconds. And yeah, that's genuinely impressive. And so was the laptop, and so was the internet when they first came out. But something interesting happens right after it gives you that list, those strategies, those approaches, and the pros and cons. Someone still has to decide. The real leadership moment isn't generating the options. Options are often easy and often plentiful. That sometimes is the problem. We've got too many options. The rubber really hits the road when you have to choose a direction, especially when every option carries a trade-off, when every option has pros and cons. The model might recommend the most efficient path forward, and it might even show you the probabilities, but it cannot decide what risk you as a leader are willing to carry. It cannot decide what consequence you're willing to accept. These are the things that are really important. That responsibility lands on a human being, and that takes judgment. Another quick question for you. When you think about the hardest decisions that leaders face, what are the most common trade-offs that show up? When a leader's got to make a hard decision, what are the most common trade-offs that they're seeing? These are the things that AI can't answer. People versus money. Oh boy. Absolutely, Kathy. Predicting value. Oh, just assigning value. Yeah, absolutely. That's a difficult one, Carson. I mean, we usually run into things like speed versus quality, innovation versus risk, short-term pressure versus long-term business health. These tensions are constant. They never really disappear. They just show up in different forms, but they can't show up in a query because they're not tangible. They're not a KPI. So like when we're talking about people versus money, I can tell AI, if I do this, I'm going to have to lose X people and we'll gain Y revenue. But that doesn't really put the impact on it. The reason why I can't stand the word resource when I'm referring to somebody like Lonnie is because Lonnie's a human being. And it's really easy to say, we let 1,300 resources go. But if we say we let 1,300 human beings go and now they don't have jobs and Lonnie's got to go home to her family and have a really hard conversation, suddenly it gets different. And those are conversations AI can't deal with. So for an example, if a leader chooses to delay a product launch, well, sometimes it's really easy. We're not going to make the date. But what if we are going to make the date? When I was working for another financial institution, fortunately, was coaching a leader who did just this. They didn't do the delay because the data said they were going to fail, but because she saw her team had already just been pushing and pushing and pushing and was exhausted. And what she didn't want to do was quietly teach them that delivery mattered more than their well-being. And so she made the call and she pushed out the delay for the product launch. Yeah, some people were upset, but her team was delighted and her team felt listened to. AI can't make that call because that judgment isn't about optimization. It isn't about metrics. It's about what kind of culture you are creating. And you are telling people what matters. And no model can truly own or be accountable for that. That is uniquely human. Another author who talks about this is Marshall Goldsmith. He wrote a great book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And the point of his book really is to explain that the skills that got you into this role aren't the skills you're going to need to get into your next role. It's about reminding you that leadership isn't about knowing the right answer. Success isn't always about knowing the right answer at all. Oftentimes, there are several right, reasonable answers. The real work he talks about is choosing how you behave in that moment. Which direction will you commit to? How will you behave? Will you listen to countering ideas or will you be, this is my thought? And will you be willing to stand behind these hard decisions that you have to make? That's judgment. Judgment remains deeply human because those choices are rarely just analytical. They're shaped by values, by the culture of the company, by the experience of the leader, by the willingness to take responsibility for what happens next. No one leaves a company. They leave bad leadership. So think about a recent decision that you made or that your team made or your company made that carried real responsibility. Did the difficulty in making that decision just come from lack of analytical data? Or did it come from the weight of the decision itself? Put your answer into chat if you've had that experience. A hard decision that had real responsibility. Yeah, Rob, both. Absolutely. We're not just spreadsheets. Multiple factors, Elena. Absolutely. Lonnie, same thing, both. Responsibility is the hardest part of leadership. That is something that AI cannot carry when it comes to judgment. Yeah, the weight of the decision with a lot of analysis. When you refer to people as human beings, suddenly these decisions don't come so cut and dried. So now we're going to get to the third uniquely human capacity, which is trust. So let's just spend a few minutes on trust. So we know AI is really good at producing language, and I don't mean this disparagingly, language that sounds supportive. You can ask it to draft an encouraging message or a thoughtful response or a lighthearted something that reads like empathy. But trust has never been about words. Trust gets built in these small moments, smaller than just a simple card or a message. It shows up in how a leader responds right after somebody says something a little bit uncomfortable in a meeting. The quality of the prompt, so the quality of the prompt it was the question that was just asked. Even if you get a really good quality prompt, that gives you a message that people can read. But there's a difference between communication and communicating. Communication is an email. It's a text message. It's a broadcast message. It's one way. The problem with that is I put together an encouraging message, but I don't know how Elena read it. She might think I don't like her. And so there's a filter that Paul is kind of out to get me. that no matter what I write, she's reading that through. My CEO doesn't care about IT, so everything the CEO says, I filter through that. Which gets back to what I was saying. Trust has never been about words. It gets built in those small moments about how a leader responds when we get uncomfortable in a meeting. So I really appreciate that prompt from Jean. It shows up like, for example, somebody points out a risk or points to a flaw in my mighty plan. Or maybe somebody quietly says, yeah, you guys are bringing this problem up, but we flagged that a couple of weeks ago. And you can almost feel the room tighten up when it happens. Without announcing it, everybody turns to Elena and waits for her as the leader to respond. Not because they're judging her, they're calibrating. Is this about to get sharp? Is somebody about to get corrected? How is she going to respond? Or is this a moment when we can actually slow down and take a look at what happens? Those few seconds before Elena says anything matters more than leaders realize. So if this sharp thing comes up and they turn to Elena and she just responds with, well, they said they responded to this a few weeks ago. Where did this breakdown in communication occur? What did we learn from it? The room responds in one way. But if she goes, before she said a word, the whole room got the message. This is going to be tough. So those few seconds are so important. They teach the room how honest it is to be safe. Trust is a uniquely human thing. Alina can spend months going through and crafting the perfect prompt to make an email look like it's empathetic. But what she says in real life, in real time, will shatter that in an instant. So the person that you talk to when you're talking about trust is Amy Edmondson. Her work on psychological safety is fantastic. She wrote a great book called Fearless Organization that I'm using here, which talks about how teams perform better when they feel safe speaking openly about real problems, real risks, and real mistakes. Not because the work becomes easier, but because the issues surface earlier when there's still time to respond, if there's a safe space to admit you made a mistake. What that means is, instead of saying failure is not an option, we say, what did we learn from this? We presume people are playing to what I call the height of their intelligence. So if Rob's code failed, Rob didn't fail. Rob's not his code. The question isn't, why did this fail, Rob? The question is, what did you learn from this? What did we as a company learn from this? What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? We don't look for why, we look for what. When we look for why problems, that has to be defended. When we look for what, we're supporting Rob, presuming he's playing to the height of his intelligence and making sure that people will still surface those issues earlier. Yeah, AI can help us generate great speeches. They can help us generate all sorts of responses, but that doesn't build trust. We have all read an email from our CTO or our CIO that we just read that and went, well, that was a bunch of bull. Trust is built by how we behave when the moment gets real. If Lonnie says as a leader that I want work-life balance to be primary, but I get an email from her at 10 o'clock on a Sunday, it didn't matter what that email said. She wants me to work 90 hours a week. So think about a leader that you deeply trusted. Not a perfect leader, there's no such thing, but just a leader you really liked to work for, that you genuinely trusted. What were the things that they did to make you feel that way? And I'm willing to bet none of you are going to write, they helped us hit that deliverable in Q3. What were the qualities of that leader, the actions of that leader that made you feel real trust? They walked their talk. Rob, absolutely perfect. Oh, another one, Alina. Excellent. I'm loving these responses. Always being heard. They listened. So always being heard takes me back to Oscar Trimboli's book, How to Listen. One of the things Oscar Trimboli found in his studies is that in your brain, when you are having a conversation where you actually feel heard, you're lighting up the same parts of your brain as when you experience feeling loved. Truly feeling heard and being loved are that similar as human beings. We are social creatures. They listened to me, they had my back. They asked me what the problem was, what I was capable of. They encouraged me. They put people first. They supported me. They were transparent. Yeah, none of you said they really got that Q2 deliverable out there in time. Weird. People don't leave companies, they leave bad leaders. Curiosity, consistency, they were calm under pressure, a willingness to listen before they reacted. Those are human behaviors, and they still matter. We have all, at some point, I would presume, interacted with AI. We all know when we're interacting with AI, even when it's good AI, because those pieces are still missing. Which brings me to the last of the 4 unique human capacities that I wanted to discuss today, care. AI can simulate empathy. We talked about it, and they can do a pretty good job of it. You can prompt it to write something compassionate, supportive, understanding, and it does it really well. I can prompt an IVR system to make it almost sound like I'm a real person. But there's a difference between sounding empathetic and actually caring about another human being. And care shows up in those moments that aren't planned. When someone admits they made a mistake, when they share that they're overwhelmed or overloaded, they're vulnerable. When they raise a concern that nobody wanted to say out loud and the room gets a little quieter. In those delicate moments, vulnerability and care are uniquely human pieces. Vulnerability falls under that caring piece because the next response from that leader is going to shape whether people feel safe and speak honestly again, or if they're going to protect themselves. And Brene Brown, if you haven't read Dare to Lead, read it. Again, all these books, all these authors will be in my notes after this class. But in her book, Dare to Read, she talks about the courage it takes for people to be vulnerable at work and the responsibility, the real powerful responsibility leaders carry when someone takes that risk. Care is not scripted. Care is not the perfectly crafted response. Care is the thing that happens accidentally that shows the culture that you're living in. It's the quality of attention you bring to another human being when something real is happening. We all have these little parasites. When you go into your boss's office and you say, "Hey, Kathy, can I talk to you for a second?" And she says, "Sure, I'm just sending a text, but go ahead. I'm listening." Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Oh, that's awful. Oh, that's just awful. We all walk out the same way. It's like, wow, okay. I know that person doesn't give 2 craps about me. But if I go into Carson's office and I say, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" And he's typing on his laptop and he looks up and he goes, "Oh, hi, Paul." And he closes his laptop. You feel it here. You feel this sense of, oh, I matter. That's care. It is not something that he says, "I am caring about you now." Notice the empathetic response as I am doing this. These are things we can't craft. These are things that AI cannot do for you. They can mimic it. And it's interesting now because the more they mimic it, that's the Turing test. It gets easier to pick it up because it's like, that was a weird response to what I just said. And so that's one of the things that remains uniquely human. So think about a moment when somebody shared something at work that was difficult. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a concern nobody else wanted to make or raise, and just slow that down in your mind for just a moment. So, what did that leader do that made it safe, that made them feel like, or made you feel like you wanted to keep talking? Just think about that and put your answers in the chat. What were the things that they did? It's going to be very similar to trust, because when you have trust, then you can have care. We have all had, we were just talking about colloquialisms before this call. There's an American colloquialism called crocodile tears, where they're simulating empathy. And so we've all had that experience with a leader. It's very similar to, yeah, keep talking, but I'm just going to be on this text chat right here because there's a fire and I have to pay attention to it. So what were the moments that that leader did to make it safe for you during those difficult moments? Because these are the moments that tend to stick with us for a long time because they quietly teach us the culture. They quietly teach us whether it's safe to be honest, whether speaking up is welcome in that environment. Now, offering to genuinely listen and then offering support. That is such a big thing, genuinely being listened to. We all, if I asked you to type in the chat the name of a boss you'd go back to work for in a heartbeat, we all could do it. We all know those people. And we all know those bosses we wouldn't go back to work for all the money in the world. And it's because of trust and care. Active listening, absolutely. They focused on me, their body language. Oh, Kathy, that's perfect. Their body language was open. That is such an important, and they were thoughtful in their response, which means they were listening to learn. That's another thing in Oscar Trimboli's look, and I'm not trying to promote Oscar over the other books, but his book speaks to this piece, that listening in his mind is the willingness to have your mind changed. So you listen without a filter of, I'm waiting to respond. You just listen. Those moments, like I said, they stick with us because they show us what that culture is. So if we're integrating this all into the conversation, we step back for a moment and look at what we've been talking about for the last little bit, a pattern really starts to show up. We looked at meaning, we talked about judgment, we spent some time on trust, and we just finished up with care. None of these are new leadership ideas. Leaders have been wrestling with these since leadership began. What's interesting is how they show up in that conversation about AI. AI is getting really good at helping us think. It can generate all sorts of options. It can summarize information. It shows us the patterns that we think we might have missed. But the things that really shape how work moves inside of an organization are a part of the culture. And AI cannot change your culture. That still lives in the human moments. Someone deciding what something means. Somebody else choosing a direction that we commit to after all of the data has been gathered. We have 30 ways we could go. It's going to affect 15,000 jobs in one way or another. Karsten's got to choose. Wow, AI can't do that. Someone responding to tension in a meeting in a way that builds trust, because Elena, when she heard about the problem, didn't say, well, who's to blame for this? She said, what did we know? What did we learn? What can we do differently to make this better so that this doesn't happen again? So she doesn't quietly shut the room down. When somebody's paying attention enough, as Rob was just saying, they genuinely listen, that the other person feels safe speaking honestly, not just saying what we need to hear. These aren't technical skills. These aren't things that queries can produce. These are human practices built on human social interaction and cultural integration. So let me ask you a question. If AI can generate answers almost instantly now, what do you think is going to become the real leadership skill? And we really can get answers almost instantly, depending on bandwidth. What's going to become the real leadership skill going forward? Caring? Wow. I hear so many companies that put profit first. If you put people first, you get the profits. So caring, definitely. Care and trust, absolutely. Any others? being able to contextualize data and empower people. Again, people, I'm seeing the same thing. All these things have to do with people. These are great responses. Connection, absolutely. Being able to anticipate. Lena, say more about that. What do you anticipate in what capacity?
Sorry, had to look for mute. Anticipate to make the next decision. Anticipate one thing to plan, another to actually face the reality and be able to make a decision in a timely manner and get people on board.
Excellent. And again, these are all things, I appreciate that. These are all things that leaders need to do, that there's not a query that's going to teach you how to navigate the politics of an organization. And better questions, deeper listening, creating space for people to speak honestly, making clear decisions, connecting with people, being able to anticipate, contextualize. None of these are new technologies. None of these are technologies. So AI can't impact them. These are moments. And if anything, those moments become more important as we increase the speed of information transfer. And at the end of the day, that's all AI is doing, increasing the speed of information transfer. So let's bring this back to where we started. We opened with a really basic powder keg of a question: what's uniquely human in the age of AI? It turns out the answer is not a new framework. I'm not trying to sell you a new tool. It's the way people show up in those moments where the work is actually moving. It's the way that people interact with each other during those moments. And it comes down to four basic things that are uniquely human in the age of AI: meaning, judgment, trust, and care. Those are the things that shape decisions. Those are the things that shape contribution. Those are the things that shape performance. So those are the key things that shape culture. And culture is what keeps a business alive. And those moments usually happen in one place, inside real-time conversations. And if AI is going to make the thinking faster, clearer, and more powerful, then in my view, the leadership work actually becomes something very simple. Learn how to be more human in the moments that matter. Because the tools, the systems, the technologies, they're going to constantly keep evolving, changing, causing temporary chaos until we understand how to work best with them. However, if we make humans the priority, the way humans make meaning together, the way humans take responsibility for decisions, build trust, care for each other in those difficult moments, that part of leadership will never go away. Which brings me to something that I say a lot when I work with senior leaders. I understand your problem, but at the core of it is people. It always has been. So that feels like a pretty good place to land on for the formal part of the conversation. I really appreciate your time, your attention, your participation in the chat text, but I really want to open it up now for what you're seeing in your own organizations. What questions are on your mind? What are you seeing in your own work as AI becomes more present in your space? So everybody can come off mute and have conversation.
I can start because something came up for me while you were going through your four points. This morning, I read or rather, I skimmed article in New York Times, and it was something about, I think, Anthropic being concerned about, making its AI more moral, apparently, and putting some moral guardrails or considering, like,
Yes, I'm familiar with that art.
yeah, what they can do. And so idea was that they want to introduce religion into AI as the moral guardrails. And I thought, whoa.
Wow.
Well,
And
the
then, so let me finish. And then the paragraph that struck me and what came up in my head right now, the paragraph was saying something that knowing a body of work in religion or religious body of work and being religious are not the same thing, because being religious comes with practicing and experiencing. And so I'm making a parallel. It is just like, decision making and judgment and everything's what you were talking about, it is all right, but it's, the practicing and experiencing being a human that would separate you from AI. And the practicing and experiencing is how you care, how trustworthy you are, how well you can hold your point of view, how well you can debate peacefully, right?
Sure.
So that's what I'm thinking about. And I just kind of like, it just came up to me. And I want to put it out there for you guys. Like, what do you think? I will almost like, I'm ready to open, practicing human circles. Let's come together and let's practice how to be human. And that also reminded me of our recent Agile Open, Kati. The Agile Open is our, yearly event where people come year after year, and we know what we're going to experience there, and we know how we're going to practice the open space. And so, like many people say that, for us, it's like my church and my religion coming to these events.
So I think what you're talking about, that Anthropic article about exploring religion, religion is it sounds more ominous than it is, because when they're talking about introducing morality, they're, like you said, talking about setting guardrails so the system can behave safely and predictably. Again, so the system can behave. It's not creating a new moral authority. They're using shared norms, etc. But it is about trying to, because they're doing things that they don't necessarily want to be doing, but they're financially being coerced into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're trying to reflect human judgment, not replace it. The real center of gravity is going to stay with us. It's how we listen, like I say, how we listen, how we question, how we interpret. No system in AI can originate meaning or care. It can only mirror what we're bringing to it. So it's the same type of a situation with when I talked about how in trust and care, it can emulate empathy, but it's garbage in, garbage out. We can write all sorts of great stuff and give it all this, but it isn't a morality in the way that we look at it. It's really guidelines, guardrails. But it's a great point. It was an interesting article. I'm familiar with it. So, but it's like, so for those of us who are true nerds, Data in Star Trek, the biggest thing he wanted to have was real emotions.
Yeah.
And that was 400 years from now. And that's real. It happened.
Well, it comes down to communication, though, all forms of communication too, right? So not just like the words that are coming out, but you're saying like the reactions, like what you see.
Yep.
So and then you said there's can be ways to fake it. So if you're having like a text bot, right, there's certain words that convey empathy, but you're just saying maybe it's the point where they become, robots, and we watch these sort of maybe fake facial or body movements that, and then we have to wonder, is this robot actually empathetic or truthful? So anyways, the communication is in many forms, and I think that's That's the combination of which derives trust and empathy.
And that goes back to Alan Turing and the Turing test. And to actually we have yet to have any program successfully emulate humanity. And that's okay. To me, I don't see it as a bad thing that it's trying to do this. We want it to be as seamless as we can, in the same way that when we went from and this is just going to show how nerdy I am, but when we went from the ox cart to the space program, we're still using the width of the ox cart as to how big the shuttle boosters can be. I think Karsten knows exactly what I'm talking about with this, but the width of an ox cart is the width of a train rail, because that was the width of the road that the Romans built, which became the width of the road for the cars and the carts and everything else that we've used, which is the width of the train that can carry the shuttle boosters for our space program, which is why our shuttle boosters are only this wide. It's because that's the diameter that they can be and still travel on that road because of 2,000 years ago.
Mm.
And when we're talking about AI, we're talking about the same thing. We're just using what somebody else gave us. And we're going to adapt, and we're going to get over it, and it's going to get better. But when we went from the typewriter to the keyboard, the world didn't fall apart. When we went from going into the office every day to Zoom calls during COVID, business improved. We thought the world was going to fall apart, but a lot of companies got more work done because they lived in the Bay Area and they didn't have to drive 2.5 hours to go 6 miles to get from Mountain View to San Francisco. And so, wow, I get to spend more time with my kids. I'm happier. My relationship improved with all my friends. My work output got better. AI can't do that. AI can't even anticipate that, because it's the same way they don't have the experience of what it means to feel stress. I can talk to you about stress. I can quote philosophically on that, but they can't emulate it without the experience.
Right. And then to express it too, right? Like you can see when somebody's, if you're a leader, if somebody's stressed out, right?
Yeah.
Often.
Well, these nonverbal context clues. I'm watching you because you become the center screen when I'm talking.
Mm.
But I'm also seeing Karsten when I said that, his head was going like this because he was laughing.
Right.
These nonverbal context clues. As human beings, we are scanning for threats 5 times a second. In tone, in posture. When you make comments, Rob, your eyebrows are very active. Where you're going, is the smile going up? Am I seeing teeth? Am I seeing too much teeth? Did that seem like a forced smile? It doesn't seem good on there, huh? All those things are being interpreted so fast
Right.
that we can't even understand that we're interpreting them. You can look at one of my favorite studies when I was going and getting my undergrad in psychology was, you can show just the eyeballs of human beings, and people can, with 85% accuracy, tell you the emotions of that person. That's how much we non-verbally pick up context that AI can't pick up. So when Kathy says, Paula, you're going to get that done, and I'm on a phone call, I can go, yeah, I got it. And she, no.
So
But if you're
I wanna ask what else people what else is coming up for you guys? Katya, I'm curious, like what do you have to say?
I'm curious because I agree with you, right? So, I drank that Kool-Aid a long time ago. I'm like so happy to hear you say that. And then I read articles like Oracle. Yeah, we fired 30,000 people so we could spend $8 billion on AI infrastructure. And then, my little brain is like, so I don't know that that leadership gets what you're saying. And I'm curious about your experience in the world, because it seems like there are going to be companies who get what you're saying, but there's a lot that maybe don't. Or am I missing something? That's kind of what I'm curious about.
100% on there. And so when you look at the real innovative companies, when Facebook came out, everybody wanted to work for Facebook because it was a great place to work because they put people first. When Google first came out, everybody wanted to work for Google. When Amazon first came out, everybody wanted to work for Amazon. They got to a point where it stopped being a people first company and it became a profit first company. And the moment that happens, it's easy for Oracle to say we laid off 30,000 resources and not say Kathy and Lena and Karsten don't have a job anymore because we wanted $8 billion more so that we could invest in something we still don't know how to use.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but that teaches you the culture. You know, if nobody here is saying, can I please go work for Amazon? Because that's not a culture you want to be a part of. Nobody's saying, I really want to go work for McKinsey because they really take care of their people. They say, I want to go work for McKinsey because they pay a lot, but I'm on the road 5 days a week. And so what you taught, that's why I say care, trust. Those are things that you can't fake. I can make up for them with paycheck. You know, I can go work for Elon Musk and make up for that with paycheck. Great. But if you want a culture where meaning, judgment, care, and trust are the forefront, then you know who to work for and who not to work for by how they respond to things like, what's your work-life balance like? If you ask that question and they pause, well, work-life balance is, of course, important to us. It's like, okay,
You know.
question. Didn't have to say anything after the pause. So you're absolutely right, Kat. What other questions are there? What other experiences?
One of the things I find really interesting about this conversation, there are people who lack the actual ability to have true empathy. And that while as human beings, they're very good at emulating it and simulating it, we consider that lack of empathy to be a mental illness, in fact. And looking at that as this is the thing that separates us from the machines that are emulating it, it really puts into perspective, you know, when we're looking for, as you say, the good leadership or just the good people to be working with, to interact with, we're looking for these people who really can have that humanity and value that humanity versus value a spreadsheet and the numbers and do they balance and am I getting my profit and et cetera.
Sure. And all of those things are important. It is not that they are not important. It is, are they the most important thing? That is the hard part. And that's where you start to see companies shifting in terms of what's the most important thing. There's a great group, actually, he's based out of California. It's called the National Institute for Play. And he's a medical doctor, but he talks about, his whole company's about the importance of bringing play into a workspace. I don't care if you're in pharmacological, high risk, high reward. If you don't have an element of, can we experiment? Then you don't get the thing every company wants, which is we all want innovation. And AI is going to give us innovation. Not if you don't allow for failure, you're not, because innovation implies failure. And if you create a culture where we can't have failure and you put all that stock into AI, AI makes mistakes because it just gives you what it thinks you want based on what you've told it. And so the inability to write an effective prompt or even a good prompt. There are lawyers right now who have been disbarred for submitting briefs with hallucinations in the briefs because they used AI and they didn't have time to proofread it. That's part of right now we're going through a Tuckman curve with AI and we're in the storming phase.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, no, I've actually noticed on the hallucinations I was saying earlier, just doing operational analytics, we found that even when we had a good prompt, if we were asking the same question over and over again, which you do when you want a report over and over again, it started going, oh, well, maybe he wants me to mix it up a little bit, or maybe he wants something different.
True.
And the first time that happened to me, I sat there and I swear my eyes went cross-eyed. I was like, did that really just happen? Screenshotted that, sent that to the developer, and yeah, we had to add something in there so it would tell us when there was hallucination in the answer. So that way we could be a little more discerning as people.
Sure. And you talked about the emotional intelligence and things like that being a big factor. I'm fairly neurospicy. I'm ADHD. And for me, a big part of the work that I do is because I've had experiences where I didn't come across with the right kind of empathy, and I'm a professional coach. And so it's funny though, because it's like I get Turing tested in real time when I'm talking to someone. It's like, I don't feel like you're really hearing me. And so I mean, when that was happening, I put a lot of focus into that piece of it. And it is a real issue when it comes to leaders. Sometimes Alina is the best programmer we have, but she's hit our pay threshold and we can't pay her anymore. So we do the worst thing with the best of intentions and we promote her to management.
Yep.
And she has no emotional intelligence, but she's the best thinker we got. And we just made her a people manager. And she gets frustrated and she quits, and the people that she works for quit, and we just lost all that IP and culture instead of changing the policy because we put profits over people.
Let me just stop the recording.